This is our Changing State Vote 2024. I'm Matthew Peddie. Voters across the Tampa Bay region cast their votes in Florida's primary election. You'll see some candidates moving on to November, and in some cases, like school board elections, the decisions have been made. Well, to talk more about what happened in the primary and what comes next, here's WUSF's Steve Newborn and Kerry Sheridan. Steve, primary elections don't always get voters too excited, so what was turnout like?
Yeah, the voter turnout was pretty average for a primary. Statewide, fewer than 1 in 4 registered voters turned out, about 22%. It's the lowest it's been in 10 years. I kind of looked that up. And statewide, less than 1 million people voted. You know, when you think about that, 1 million out of the 22 million people or so who live here are choosing who is going to represent you. So maybe that's a little food for thought for more people to go out and vote in November.
You mentioned the Senate race and saying that there wasn't a lot of drama in that, but what happened? Just remind us.
So Rick Scott, who's been in office in one form or another, senator or governor for at least a dozen years now, had some token Republican contestants going against him. They didn't really have a chance. He won 80-something% of the vote. On the Democratic side, Debbie Murkisell Powell, a former congresswoman from South Florida, easily won the Democratic primary.
Kerry, you've been reporting on the Sarasota County School Board and the elections in Districts 2 and 3. Now, Liz Barker won in District 2 and Tom Edwards won in District 3. So what should people know about the District 2 winner in that race?
Yeah, Liz Barker is a real newcomer to the scene in Sarasota. She is a mom of 4 children, all in public schools. She's the PTO president of one of her children's schools, and so she's very involved in that way. She's a former school psychologist, and she's been vocal at school board meetings, really over the past year, speaking up on issues, and she decided to run to I believe her campaign slogan was something about competence over chaos, and she didn't really press the political angle of it. Of course, we know school board races are supposed to be nonpartisan, but mostly people seem to know which party people are affiliated with. But she didn't really push that too much. It was just more a real grassroots campaign of reaching out to people, going door to door, and getting some people on her side to go out and make contacts for her. And when you look at her campaign contributions, it really reflects that. A lot of, $18, $25, $100 here and there. But it was a lot of community support that seems to have propelled her into office against an incumbent who was Karen Rose, who, by all appearances would have been a perfect person to reelect. She's a former principal, former teacher, has been on the school board for quite a long time. But she has grown increasingly political in recent years, and she was part of the conservative majority on the Sarasota School Board that made some decisions that really cost the district quite a lot of money. And that was like firing the superintendent after the conservative majority took over in 2022. That was national news,
Right. Although he actually resigned, right? He wasn't technically
correct,
fired,
he
but
wasn't,
he was pushed out.
He was pushed out, correct. Yeah. But they had to give him a resignation package that was quite expensive because it was a no-fault removal.
And District 3, Tom Edwards, this is a name that's pretty familiar to folks who live in Sarasota County. People have been paying attention to the news and especially following the drama around school boards lately. What can you tell us about this?
Well, Tom Edwards is one of those school board members who you just see around a lot. You see him at school events. He's a Democrat, but he doesn't push the politics part of it. And he's also the only openly gay person on the board. So when these culture war issues were really flaring up a few years ago with Moms for Liberty and accusations of grooming, sometimes people in the school board meetings would say really negative things toward him, and the school board chair would not stop that from happening. So in the years since he was first elected in 2020, and he's really taken a role in bringing entrepreneurs in the community into schools, improving career education, improving arts facilities at schools and things like that.
I should note too, though, he describes himself as a moderate, but folks who wanted him ousted and people on the conservative side would say he's not a moderate. They would sort of paint him as more of an extreme leftist. That's what we've heard, at least.
Yeah, and I think that painting as extreme is sort of something that may be falling out of fashion in terms as school boards go. I think that this vote showed us that there was a large Democratic turnout compared to prior years. Sarasota County overall being just around 32%, actually a little bit lower turnout than the last election 2 years ago. But people seem to want to have some normalcy back into their school boards, make them boring again, maybe.
So is that your takeaway from these two school board seats and who won in terms of what the makeup of the school board is going forward and what that means for policy and teachers and students?
Well, it's, I think, important to point out that there is still a 3-2 conservative majority on the Sarasota School Board. But without Karen Rose there as a key ally to Bridget Ziegler, it does shift the balance of experience. Without Karen Rose there, there's a lot less experience on that board. So that will be interesting to see. It'll just be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
This may be the last time school board races are decided in nonpartisan races in the primary, depending on how people vote in a proposed amendment in November. Did that issue come up on the campaign trail?
Well, I think that people who were campaigning for the different candidates, yes, very aware of the politics involved. Are people, regular, everyday people in the grocery store aware? Possibly not. You know, they may not really know. They may have seen a sign or they may have heard something. But a lot of people ask, who should I vote for? And they ask somebody that they know or somebody who's out campaigning, what should I do? So in that sense, maybe politics are a little bit too much a part of it.
And do these results, Kerry, on the county and school level provide any clues on how the general election campaigns could look?
Well, I think that with more Democratic turnout, this is all being sparked by Kamala Harris taking the head ticket. There is more interest. There's more enthusiasm. When I voted, I noticed that there was a Democratic tent outside the library. And the last few years, I haven't even seen one. It's only been a red Republican tent. So there were 3 Republican tents to 1 Democrat. So there is some more enthusiasm, but it will really depend on who really gets out and votes.
Steve, what was your experience casting a ballot yourself, just kind of thinking about that personal experience of voting in this primary election?
Well, I'm kind of old-fashioned in that respect. I like to go to the polls on Election Day just to kind of gauge the mood and the flow of people in and out of there. I asked the poll workers how the turnout was, and they said it was pretty good for that day. So, not bad turnout for going to the polls on Election Day as opposed to voting earlier by mail.
Now, one of the races you've been paying attention to in Hillsborough County is the state attorney race. Ousted state attorney Andrew Warren had to get through a primary challenge if he wanted to get his old job back. So what happened there?
Right. So Warren handily won his Democratic primary. The challenger was Elizabeth Martinez Strauss. She's a Tampa lawyer who applied to run before Warren changed his mind that he was going to run again. He had originally, after he got suspended by Governor DeSantis for signing a pledge not to enforce certain laws regarding abortion and transgender health care, he was kind of on the fence whether he was going to run, and so Elizabeth Strauss decided to register for that just in case.
Yeah, in fact, I think at one point he said, I am not going to run
He did.
for re-election, and then changed his mind.
2 months later, he changed his mind, which, we're all entitled to do. So Warren won pretty easily. Now, he will face the woman who replaced him when Judge Susie Lopez was appointed by Governor DeSantis to that position. Yeah, I went to a recent Tampa Tiger Bay debate between the two, and let me tell you, there's no love lost between these two. That was obvious. And it's going to be a real interesting race come November.
Sarasota County Hospital Board elections were held on August 20th. So what happened there? Who won those races?
All right, so the Sarasota Hospital Board, this is one of those down-ballot tickets that nobody ever talks about, right, Kerry? I mean, most people don't even know it exists, right? It's a public hospital. They have elections. It's one of the few counties that actually has this. So a couple of years ago, the Medical Freedom slate won a couple of seats there. This is after COVID-19 and the whole hullabaloo about wearing masks, vaccines, and such. So we had 4 candidates who had chosen to run on this medical freedom ticket, and they all lost. Republicans, mainstream Republicans, came together. This is a Republican-only primary. The mainstream Republicans rallied, and they beat all four of these medical freedom slate candidates. So maybe the tide is turning a little bit on the meter, which way the wind blows in that particular fashion. So that was maybe unexpected.
Kerry, it strikes me that both in the case of the hospital board and also the school board, you have two sort of movements in terms of the culture wars and then the medical freedom movement, which arose out of the pandemic. And now, as Steve says, maybe the tide's turning there a bit. So when you look at the hospital board, what does this election portend for the direction that board may take and the hospital itself?
Yeah, there were some Democrats who changed their party affiliation before this just to vote in the hospital board because it is a Republican-only, situation in that way. So it probably was Republicans mainly coming together against them, but some Democrats added their voices to that. And it does show, interestingly, that there is a faith that people have in the system. And I think that during COVID, there was a lot of questions that came up about misinformation and people being unable to see their loved ones in their dying moments. Of course, this was very upsetting to people and wanting to have some control over, their own medical freedom is where this whole movement was born out of. But will it last? Does it really have the legs? Apparently not. Also with the partisanship we talked about in school boards, Governor DeSantis endorsed 23 candidates, 11 lost, and the last time around, most of them won. So that's quite a shift.
Any surprises aside from those two races to you this primary, Kerry?
Well, in Manatee County, there were two members of the commission who were voted out, two incumbents, Van Osterbridge and another one. They were, incumbents, powerful, wealthy, had raised a lot of money and lost their seats. And that could be also a sign of after Tropical Storm Debbie passed by, became a hurricane later, a lot of flooding in Sarasota and Manatee County, and a lot of people are angry and have questions about the overdevelopment. So it's, to me, I don't cover politics that much, but it seems to me to be a moment of people really engaging and realizing how their choices affect their lives, whether it's their home gets flooded, their streets, their schools are throwing a lot of extra paperwork at teachers about pornography that didn't really exist as a problem to begin with. They may be speaking up and trying to restore their own voices in their community.
Yeah, I think people really are realizing that elections count. You need to go to the ballot box, you need to vote, and that's the only way you're going to, enact this change that they want. If you don't vote, you have no right to complain, right?
Steve, you have been covering Tampa Bay and Florida politics for a long time, and as you know, a lot of new people have moved here. There's a whole new generation of voters as well. What's your advice for those folks as we head towards November?
Well, it's interesting how fast the political scene changes, right? Just in the last month or so, we have a totally different presidential campaign going on, right? So my advice is to, if you're not familiar with the candidates, do your research. I mean, there's tons of articles out there. Go to their website, read up on what they propose, read up about on who they back, what they want to do. Do your homework and just register to vote. Get out there and make a difference.
And in terms of the new generation, you've got a personal connection to that, right? Seeing that new generation come through and cast their ballots.
Yeah. So I told you earlier I went to the polls in person yesterday. And I brought my son. He just turned 18, voted for the first time, in a primary, too. This isn't just a presidential election. And he came out of that little booth with a big smile on his face. I put it up on Facebook. I was very proud daddy. So, it's nice to see democracy in action, on a personal level like that, right?
Steve Newborn, thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And Kerry Sheridan as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
A Changing State is a production of WUSF. Our executive producer is Gracyn Doctor. Scott Wachtler produces the podcast. Videos by Warren Buchholz and Chandler Balkcom, who also does our graphics. Engineering support from Blake Bass. Jackson Harpe composed our theme music. I'm Matthew Peddie. Thanks for listening.